T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Launch Sequence Podcast. Back for another week for a good talk. This is, I think, a talk a lot of people want to know about. Star Citizen struggled in performance a lot for a long time for several reasons we're going to go over today, but they might actually be starting to make some progress with this whole push this year and with server meshing and the Gen 12 render and all that stuff. So I brought in the man for this talk, the guy, the benchmark, the Star Citizen benchmarks guy. Welcome to TenPound. Yeah,
the only one who's silly enough.
The most difficult job to have.
Nobody else would waste so much time running around the game, but there we go. It's fun. I enjoy it.
Even the QA people were like, okay, thanks, dude. No, I'm kidding. The people making the game obviously have a very difficult job, but as far as making YouTube content goes, you are focused on attacking the important questions around performance. What graphics cards are working, which CPUs are working, how is the game performing now, is it making progress? Just like to get us off to a start, to preview the whole episode, in 2 sentences, how's that been for you this year?
This year, well, we have had a couple of interesting GPU releases. So we've had obviously NVIDIA with in theory, some people may have heard rumors that they released the 5000 series cards, but most people have not seen any evidence of that. They're pretty hard to get, and there's been some issues with them.
And then AMD issues.
Yeah, there's been some issues, and then AMD have just released the 9070 XT and the non-XT model, but that's not so interesting. But I just made a video about that on Friday, whatever day this is, who knows, a couple of days ago, and that's very interesting. It's a decent price. Again, pretty impossible to get hold of at MSRP right now, but the hope is that will eventually be a really good option, especially at 1440p. But we're going to talk about that in a minute. There's some really... It's good. We want competition. NVIDIA, I think their market share is something like 90% of the GPU market, and that isn't good for anybody because the prices just go up and up and up, and this generation especially gets less and less impressive in terms of gain. So we need good competition. It's like all these things. So yeah, lots of fun stuff going on at the moment. And Star Citizen itself is in a year of... Obviously, we're talking about a lot of stuff about content at the moment. Lots of content has been flooding into the game, and it's a year of content, but they obviously also talked about it being a year of stability and performance, and there are signs of that. So, yeah, it's good.
Yeah. And if you guys want to hear more about how the hardware performs, we're going to get to that. We're definitely going to get to that. But first, I want to start by talking about performance in general in gaming. This is, I think, a conversation that goes well beyond Star Citizen, especially this past year, I would say. With the rise of Unreal Engine 5, and I say rise, with the release of Unreal Engine 5, with maybe more games on average over the last several years coming out less optimized than people expect, and a couple different people on YouTube, in the media, even in the games industry, sort of calling people out for not optimizing their games well, for not making their games perform as they should for where we are in technology. This is it's a big conversation, performance in games. It's not just about graphics. It's about, can you even see those graphics now? What do you think of that going on? I mean, what's the last big game that you played that had a good release?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? I'm trying to think about games that I don't even know.
I was Civ 7. Gosh.
Yeah.
So sad.
I mean, I can tell you the last one I played that didn't go particularly well. I played a fair bit of the Star Wars Outlaws game, which actually comparatively wasn't that bad. There were some issues compared to the Star Wars Jedi Survivor 2 game, or whatever that one was called. That was the Star Wars games have been a bit rough.
You did a video
there were
about
some
that,
definite crashes. Yeah, I did. I mean, there's always some sort of Star Citizen angle in any video I do. I always tell people that if I make a video that doesn't include Star Citizen, you have permission to shout at me in the comments. But yeah, I compared at one point Jedi Survivor 2 to Star Citizen, not as a comparison, but there are some serious issues with that game. That's an Unreal Engine 5 game. There are massive issues in terms of shader stuff. Digital Foundry has covered this extensively, and originally, actually, when I made that video, I kind of said, I don't know if they're ever going to really fix this, and they haven't really completely fixed it still down the line. But the Outlaws one, there were some crashes when ray tracing is on by default in that game, and so there certain areas of the game there was big drops in. Yeah, basically, in answer to your question, there's not really any PC games that release really solidly that are trying to push things. There's always seems to be something. Maybe that's not completely fair, but yeah, it is
Yeah.
a it's a minefield. You almost got to the point where you say when a PC port comes out of a game, well, I'll probably just wait a couple of months and just they'll get all the rubbish fixed. But that's not that much fun. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's been a sort of habit that the industry has settled into. And it makes it harder to be like, well, when is Star Citizen running well enough? Because
yeah,
we all have very clear problems with Star Citizen that we would like to see wiped out for it to be, a game. We don't want to get killed by elevators. We don't want to fall through the floor. You want to when you press the reload button, you want to reload. Like these are very simple things. That's not simple to do maybe, but simple to ask for. You get much more into depth when you're like, oh, well, I want to make sure that there is occlusion to items when I'm looking at them through fog, and these graphical glitches get in they catch my attention. That doesn't break the game. That doesn't stop people from playing. So it kind of gets hard to say when is a game good enough to be release ready. I think
yeah,
Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 came out recently on the CryEngine, and it's considered a pretty good launch, right?
yeah,
You were saying that on
yeah.
specifically on CryEngine that looked good.
The general gist of that game is it's been really well received. I haven't followed that closely, but I'm not aware of massive issues. But yeah, it is interesting how a game can come out in 2025 on CryEngine and it runs, from what I understand, pretty well. And yeah, obviously we could probably count into the thousands the amount of times that people have said, why don't CIG swap to Unreal Engine 5, despite that being not a good
Dude,
idea
I
anyway.
just had that just this last week in stream. Somebody was go like for I would say a few minutes. They were telling everybody how CIG needs to switch to Unreal, and it would be so much better. And I'm like, dude,
Yeah. It's one of the things that's been. There are many reasons why they can't do that. What's interesting with Kingdom Come Deliverance, I found this article. The kind of studio lead, basically, of Kingdom Come Deliverance, the director, he basically said they're talking about the choice between CryEngine and Unreal 5, and he was basically saying that Unreal Engine is just really hard for open world games, and we can see that in all the examples that have come out over the last few years. And he was just talking about the fact that The Witcher 4, they've switched to Unreal Engine 5, and he just thinks it's a huge mistake because basically Unreal Engine 5 isn't well suited to massive open world games. And so obviously we're not using the base version of the CryEngine, but the kind of heritage of the Star Engine is goes through CryEngine up to Lumberyard to whatever CIG have got now, and ultimately you now look at it and say maybe CIG made a very good decision to stick with the CryEngine. They at the time they didn't really have any choice. The version of Unreal Engine, I think it was Unreal Engine 3 at that point.
yeah,
It wasn't anywhere near capable of doing what they wanted, and nor really was CryEngine. But they've now put so much work into it. I think interestingly, what possibly happens with some of these big kind of games that they don't go that well is that Unreal Engine 5 is sort of like an off the shelf package in some ways, in that you buying the engine uh, from man, who is it? Who owns the engine?
Epic.
Epic, yeah, Epic. They in theory are doing quite a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of. So in theory, an amateur can go into Unreal Engine 5 and pump out some stuff. What CIG have done quite dramatically different from that is they basically got a load of original CryEngine devs from back in the day. Obviously, that this happened a long time ago. Some of the
Hmm.
people that come up in videos now, the guys who are really senior at the company, were really kind of involved in putting the CryEngine together in the first place. So
Yeah.
CIG have got access to really talented and experienced devs with their engine, where your average game that might just be choosing to use Unreal Engine 5 because of the fact that it's got like everybody shouts about looming and all this stuff, that sort of stuff. Well, they might not have the kind of expertise that CIG does at their disposal. So CIG actually, in the end, probably made the right choice and have ended up in a better position because of they did stick. I mean,
Yeah.
there probably was a point back in the day where they could have said, "Oh, maybe we'll just scrap everything and move across to Unreal Engine," but it's worked out pretty well in the end, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that point of no return, and I'm
Yeah.
I'm definitely not an engine developer. I don't know this stuff like the back of my hand,
No.
but I have seen these industries change over time, and like this is not something that is exclusive to the gaming industry. If you work on and and cherish something, God, that's hard to say. Cherish something long
Yeah.
enough, usually you can build it to fit your needs. And it may
Yeah.
not have been the CryEngine that they needed at the time, but you're right. For anybody who doesn't know, I think this is a really, really undervalued part of CIG. I think anybody who follows this probably thinks this is likely something people are missing when they talk about Star Citizen as a whole. They basically acquired like a large percentage of the team that made CryEngine. And
Yeah.
CryEngine is the basis for the Dunya engine. It's the basis for the Lumberyard engine. It's still used for games like Hunt Showdown and um, the one you just mentioned. What was that?
Yeah. KCDC. Yeah.
KCDC. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you've got like all the Far Cry games are, they come from that lineage.
Yeah.
And you start to think about, okay, well, if you took an engine that was that commonly used for certain reasons, and you took the people who literally built it, and then you paid them, because that's the whole reason they got dropped off, right?
Yeah.
Crytek
Yeah. Yeah.
couldn't pay for their employees. CIG took those employees and made a new studio, guys. Like
Yeah.
you can't really buy that. That's really lucky. And I think that's a big reason why they stuck with that engine. And even if the engine's not exactly what they need, they have super valuable IP now because of that. I mean, they're positioned to. I wouldn't say like go after companies that are making game engines or anything like that, but more so than other developers in the industry, they can like publish for themselves. They can use
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
game engine. They can license the game engine for themselves, and they can produce. It's kind of
Yeah.
crazy.
And even though we're not anywhere near what we all want it to be, what is already on our screens and what we can already play is already in some ways spectacular. I mean, it's spectacular with many, many issues, but they've already created something that actually, from a technical side of things, isn't something that any other engine could do. Yeah, so there's plenty of issues with this game's development. There's plenty of things that they maybe should have done wrong, that they did wrong, and they should have done differently. But I think actually on the engine side, they, whether by luck or by judgment, they've done a pretty good job working it all out and bringing us to where we are. Yeah, it's
Okay.
good. The engine is good.
Interesting to hear. I can't wait to get a more insight into it. I don't know how much they'll ever tell us, but obviously we've
Yeah.
heard whispers and murmurs about like this tool makes it very hard to use and this technology has made the engine a lot better and clearly they've done a lot of refactors. So I can't imagine how much like little bits of drama there have been in creating the engine.
Yeah,
I'm glad that they aren't tied at the hip to some big company like Epic though.
yeah, yeah. And I should just carry out. When I say the engine is good, I mean because I know if I don't clarify this, what I'm saying is where we are now, the base of what we're building off now is good.
Hmm.
I'm clearly aware that the engine, in some ways, is not what you describe as good on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you've had a crash before watching this and you just heard me say the engine is good, yeah, you probably wouldn't quite believe me. Yeah,
That they just jumped forward in the video and then you're over here.
yeah.
The engine is good.
The
We
engine is
are
good.
good.
Well,
Everything's
it's
great.
it's a good foundation, but currently we're hopefully moving in the right direction, which we can talk about in a minute. But I mean, they are doing kind of what they said they would do it in that they've developed the big kind of tech things, and
Right.
now they're working on making it actually perform pretty well and be stable. That's kind of what you're meant to do, from my understanding of game development. You're not meant to. You don't optimize and then just decide. I mean, we've heard this from CIG themselves. You don't get to a point, spend a load of time optimizing, and then just chuck in a massive other massive other bit of tech that changes everything. You get the basics together, which effectively now with server meshing they've done, and then this year kind of makes some sort of sense.
Yeah.
Optimizing content, yeah, it kind of
You know,
works. So
it seems like they have a difficult time sending that messaging to people. A lot of people are still of the mindset of like, they should have done this years ago kind of thing. And you know, I
Yeah.
agree. I would love if they had, but it seems like CIG is not clearly breaking through to some people that they wanted to wait until after server meshing. Do you think that that's important, that even matters, or should they just forget about explaining that?
Oh, I suppose it depends how closely people follow the project. Some obviously, for maybe people like us who maybe follow it too closely, you'd have to. But we fully aware of all this stuff. But if you just want to play with your friends and you think, oh, this game looks cool, and you log on with your mates and you just play every now and again or every couple of weeks or whatever, you probably don't care why anything works or doesn't work. You just want to play, and so yeah, I think there'll be certain people who will never be interested in the reasons why they've taken so long to make a push for stability and performance. But yeah, it just depends if you really want. All the thing with CIG is, and now the years worth of development and videos that they've got, all the information is out there if you want to dig into it. And there's obviously people like you who are amazing at covering the history of stuff and what's going on with certain parts of the game, all sorts of things. There's plenty of there's stuff is out there if you want to find it and
Yeah.
if you want to make a tiny bit of effort. But if you're just not interested in that stuff, then I don't think CIG can really do much more than they are already to kind of communicate what's going on. Because some people they just want to play the game and they don't care about anything else, which
Yeah, as
is
long
kind
as
of
the game
understandable.
works, it's not even really important, right? At the end of the
Yeah,
day, like who cares why
but,
it is the way it
but
is?
because it hasn't worked really that well up until at least this point.
Mhm.
This sort of thing has caused. I mean, can you imagine if you bought a game package and then you log? Can you if you'd had no idea about Star Citizen and you just thought, oh, this looks cool. You saw one of the trailers maybe. You logged into the game. You got your maybe you got your older
Oof.
PC. You turn it on and you're like, what's happening? Why is everything what's going on? Why is it so bad? Why is performance so bad?
Yeah.
Why are the elevators killing me? There's so many things if you didn't know what was going on, you'd be shocked. Which is obviously what some I mean, the Shroud the streamer Shroud when he played it, he was just like, what is happening? Why are people backing this game? Because it on some levels, if you have no understanding, it is shocking. But for people who's probably watching this video, you understand a bit of why it's got to where it is, and yeah, it's a funny one. It's a funny situation in some
The,
ways.
I think the interesting thing to me is everybody has a level of uncertainty. Like even as we sit here and talk about this, guys, I obviously don't have 100% confidence that this game will ever run anywhere near
Yeah.
perfectly, right? Like as a
Mm.
what we would call an established AAA game. We're mostly just talking out of what we see and the progress we've seen and obviously what we're going to go over today, but I don't blame people for having that reaction like you're saying. If you
Yeah.
didn't know anything and you jumped in, I see a lot of people talking like the way that we play Star Citizen is how it's supposed to be forever. I mean, it's even the way that people are reacting to this item recovery stuff with the T0.
Yeah.
A lot of people are looking at T0 and then criticizing it as if it is how the game is meant to be designed. And I know there are problems with, you know, the other tiers, but there is a small section of people who don't understand that when news comes out, it's not about the finalized game. It's about whatever is just happening in the development right now, which is a problem that
Yeah.
CIG made for themselves.
Yeah. And there is a case to say that doing open development, as they have called it over the years, you could make the argument that it was a bad decision in some ways, because certain people just can't cope with the nature of the information coming out and, like you say, understanding what CIG really mean. There's a lot of kind of I don't want to insult anybody, but there's some people who just don't really their reading comprehension maybe isn't that great, and so they'll read something and then spiral out of control, and things will get they'll feel like, oh, it's terrible. Whereas yeah, often it requires a bit of nuance to understand what CIG are actually saying. When you get up the letters from the chairman, if you've been around a while, what people do, you read it and then you reread it, thinking, "Well, what does this really mean? What when Chris Roberts gives a date, what does he really mean?" Like there is some
Yeah.
stuff that you can do if you've been around for 13 years or whatever craziness it is now.
I would say
But
it's nuance or maybe like more shaky language.
yeah, well, yeah, that's good. That's it. And to be fair, it's not. Maybe that's not fair to insult everybody and say nobody can read. What I probably should say is
Oh, well, I mean, I think you're onto something there.
some people maybe struggle to get the meaning, but yes, CIG have at many points communicated in a way that, let's say, was less than completely clear. I think that's the fairest way to put it.
Yeah, it's just completely wrong.
Well, they've done that a few times as well, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, but again, that's the nature of the product, of doing it open, of trying to give internal
yeah,
timelines on stuff that you guys don't even know if it's gonna work, and that's that's all. I mean, that's a whole conversation, but let's get into the performance of the game itself.
yeah.
Um, for starters, what would be acceptable to you? Let's talk frames per second, and then assume
Okay.
that, like, you're not experiencing desync and rubber banding and all that stuff.
Okay. So acceptable in terms of a bare minimum, or acceptable as, like you say, a finished game would perform.
Give me the classic AAA release, recommended and bare minimum basic.
Okay. Well, we'll do bare minimum. So I personally think, because Star Citizen is quite demanding, I always talk about 30 FPS being the bare minimum that you'd want to try and play it at. And there will be people who will go either way on that. Some people will be like, I play it at 15 FPS. It's absolutely fine. I don't know what you're talking about. And then there'll be also people who be like, 30 FPS is absolutely not acceptable as a bare minimum, as a minimum spec for a PC game.
Yeah,
So you can do with that what you want. But for me, 30 FPS is what I kind of target when I'm putting videos together, talking about minimum spec builds. And what that is, just quickly, is on the CPU side, you're talking a Ryzen 3600, and on the Intel side, a 10 i5 10400, around that sort of mark. And again, there'll be different variations of those CPUs, or there'll be an older generation that you can overclock,
an
or
i5 10400 for 30 frames.
it will be around. Yeah, I should clarify this. It will be around the 30 FPS mark with definite dips below. That's what
Okay,
I sort of class, because actually, to get really half decent performance in Star Citizen, you have to spend quite a lot of money. But I don't really want my videos to say everybody who plays this game has to go out and spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars or whatever. As in, I think you should be able to try the game out on a kind of a fairly kind of mid to lower end system and see what it's like. So targeting 30 FPS, but if you're in the cities, especially with those CPUs, you will you will definitely drop below.
okay.
And that's just the reality of Star Citizen at this point. Even after 4.0 came out and there'd been quite a lot of performance improvements, which we can talk about in a minute, still those CPUs would dip below 30 FPS. But you can get around the game, at least in the cities, especially where it's the most kind of choppy for CPUs. And then on the RAM side, now this will people will again not be particularly happy with this. You can play the game with 16 FPS. The experience gets so much better when you go up to 32 at least. Uh, and so I say that as a bare minimum, you can play with 16 FPS. But what most people end up doing is they play with 16 gigabytes, sorry, and
Oh,
then
okay.
they just go, yeah, sorry, yeah. If you've got 16 gigabytes in your system, you can get around, you can play. You have to use the page file. It's not good. There'll be big kind of judders and stutters. Most people then go, well, it's quite an easy upgrade to just chuck in 32 gigabytes of RAM, and it makes a significant difference. So most people, again, a lot of people would say 32 gigabytes is the minimum. I would
Hmm.
say, again, if you're trying to check out the game, you've got a kind of mid-range system and you've got 16 gigabytes, you can play it. It's just not great.
Now,
Um,
over
and
time, these minimums, have they gone up or down,
um,
or have they stayed the same? Like, is
they
Star Citizen actually getting better at using these minimums, or is it continuing
not,
to cut people off as it progresses?
yeah, it's on the GPU side of things, it's definitely not getting easier to run. It's getting harder to run, which
Okay.
we'll talk about in a second. But on the CPU side of things, yeah, it also, as more entities are chucked into the game in different areas, it's getting harder to run. Occasionally, CIG will do like a bit of a clear up where they'll try and optimize, which is what they're doing now. And over the last few patches, it's been quite successful. But over time, the game is gradually getting harder and harder to run. And CIG did actually update their minimum specs, which are still completely wrong. But they did do they at least acknowledged, I think, that things had changed since 2012. And so we now have a slightly better list, which is also still pretty wrong. But That's why I make those videos, so people have the real minimum spec. But yeah, and just quickly on the GPU side of things, so CIG I think still are recommending GPUs with 4 GB of VRAM, and that's really not ideal. And so, especially on the AMD side, anything really less than kind of 10 GB really suffers from like big kind of slowdowns.
Wow.
Nvidia's a bit better. Yeah. It, what's interesting actually is that the VRAM usage is now even at 1080p is hovering around 8 GB in the cities. And so what we probably should say though is that Ali Brown Ali Brown did this loads of comments recently in on Spectrum. One of the things he said was that they're changing the way they do VRAM, and they're trying to basically force developers to stay within a target because they know that it's got a bit out of control, I think, effectively. But they're still targeting some pretty low end GPUs, and I assume part of that is to do with Squadron 42. They want Squadron to be able to be played on all sorts of machines. But I
Yeah.
personally, the minimum I recommend is a 1660, uh, which has only got 6 GB of VRAM. That's just about the minimum. The complication will be that you now can use upscaling, so you can use something like a 1660, which is a bit slower and upscale and still make it usable. That a lot of this kind of depends on the clouds. I'm talking about clouds on medium, and I think you actually said to me that you haven't got the option to turn clouds off in one of
I
the
haven't
recent
actually
patches.
seen that yet. I've seen people talking
No.
about that, but
Yeah, so that is also going to be a factor. But yeah, around the 1660 mark, actually at 1080p, I'd probably recommend something as powerful as a 6700 XT, which has got 12. I think I've got one behind me, but I think it's got 12 GB of video, and that's actually what I would say is a good 1080p video card. But yeah, it none of this stuff is like ideal. It's all probably higher than CIG want it to be, and probably people coming into the game. If you're coming into the game on like a Sandy Bridge i7 or something, like the original kind of beast level, some people are still running those. They do not play the game very well at this point, and they are technically CIG's minimum spec. So it's a
s-
it's a funny one. So that's a
so
long answer, but that go on, go on.
no, go ahead.
No, I was going to move on to more of a recommended thing, but go on, ask
Oh,
a question.
well, it just sounds like Star Citizen's performance is getting better, but their optimization still hasn't quite caught up yet.
It's getting better if you've got really high. I mean, it is getting better, but you really feel it on high end hardware. So
Those one
now,
percenters, huh?
well, yeah, but I mean, in Star Citizen's community, I think there's probably more 1%ers than you'd expect in
It's
most
five
gaming
percenters.
communities because it's fine to spend £20,000 or dollars on spaceships. So buying a nice PC shouldn't be that big a deal, should it? So yeah,
True.
I think we've probably got a higher proportion of 1% PC owners. But if you're running on real high end specs, so the system I wouldn't do this if I didn't have a YouTube channel, but because you have to test on like high end hardware, so you're not bottlenecked all the time.
Hmm.
Having the 9800 XUD as the CPU, even the 7800 XUD, which you've got now, you get pretty decent performance in most parts of the game, and so it starts to look like a real game, like we talked about there. What you expect, what I would expect from a kind of on a PC, I'm really not happy with 60 FPS as like as the topping out. I
Hmm.
mean, some games come out and they're like almost limited to 60 FPS or targeting 60 FPS for PC. I think that's no good. I think I would love to see 120 FPS as if you've got really top end hardware. That's what I would love to see. 120 FPS in the cities. We are now with the top we've got now. I'll have a quick look. I literally just did some testing last week for the 9070 XT, the new AMD card, but at 1080p, that is not the bottleneck. So at 1080p, you're around on the CPU basically. The 9800 actually is the bottleneck, and that is able to pump
Wow.
out 80, 85-ish FPS at 1080p. So we're not that far. That's an average running around Lawville. We're not that far from that 120 FPS. If you'd said a few years ago you can play this game in the cities at 85 FPS, I would have thought you were smoking something. There was just no way.
Right.
We
You
have
can go
seen
back to podcast episodes from a couple of years ago where you were on.
Yeah,
And you
yeah,
were talking about tests in the cities because it would be fine in space, but then you'd get down to the cities and it'd be dropping way down, right?
yeah. You'd be really lucky to get anywhere near 60 FPS a couple of years ago. And part of this is down to the fact that we've got faster hardware. This is the thing I always find funny is that it's not that CIG necessarily have done much to optimize the game over the years.
Technology's
It's just
catching up.
hardware keeps getting faster and faster. And so now with the X3D chips, the latest ones, they're very fast. They're great. They're the most exciting thing probably out there. The graphics cards in some ways are whatever they are, but for
Yeah.
CIG, for Star Citizen, the CPU is the important thing, and things like memory bandwidth, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, the frames that you can achieve now, if you've got a really high end PC, are close to what you might expect in a game. Which yeah, but going back to whatever it was 3.0 when you'd struggle to get 20 FPS. I mean, it has come a fair distance, but
You would literally struggle to get that. Was not an exaggeration. I think like
no, no, no.
90% of the community could not get over 16 frames per second back then.
It was pretty rough, but
Oof.
yeah, like I say, a lot of that is just that the hardware has got a lot faster. So
Well,
that's what
that's
happens if you develop a game for 12 years. Things
yeah, I was
change.
gonna say there's like it used to be can it run Crisis was sort of an honor to
Yeah,
be asked because oh it's hard for this computer to run this game, but now it's kind of like okay if you need good hardware to run your game, a lot of people take that as you're not optimizing well. There's like full on YouTube channels that are dedicated to just calling out the industry for not doing this kind of stuff. So it's like they wanted to create Star Citizen to be something that you had to have a PC to run. Like it's difficult to
yeah,
run. It's a very uh, cutting edge, sort of pushing the boundaries kind of game. But at the same time, there's also some level of a lot of people need to be able to play this. So there's a balance of
yeah,
making a really impressive looking game, but also making sure it can run on a lot of machines.
yeah, definitely. And I personally think a lot of the reason for this year, the push for optimization, is because obviously it is the same engine as Squadron, and they if they are going to genuinely release Squadron next year, which we could probably have a good conversation about whether that will really happen. But if they do, and they seem to be wanting that to genuinely be the case, this isn't like a oh we'd love to. As in, I'm genuinely hopeful that it will come out in 2026, but they have to optimize the engine for that to happen because
Right.
like we've been talking about they've just not spent a lot of time optimizing the engine over the 12 years because they've been doing big tech development for it. So if they are now going to release what is looking to be I think it's fair to say it's looking to be a pinnacle industry standard triple A single player game is what CIG are aiming for. Whether it can hit that or not, I don't know, but
Hmm.
that's what they'd like it to be. And so they have to then, I think Star Citizen is benefiting from this year of having to get everything together, and also in some ways there are negatives to it because obviously feature development seems to have almost completely not that's not fair, but feature development has definitely slowed down significantly to allow them to optimize. And yeah, I personally think a lot of the reason for that is that they cannot release Squadron and it be yeah, like we say, all these other games that are coming out on Unreal Engine 5 where it's just there's stutters, there's bugginess all over the place.
Hmm.
CIG cannot release a buggy mess. They cannot do it. It will be extraordinarily narrowly bad for the company if all of the things that we've all said over the years, all of the wider, everybody said that it was a scam. Everybody said it's a complete horrible tech demo. If that's proven to be anywhere near true when Squadron comes out, they're screwed.
Hmm.
I think they're in real trouble. So I think that's why they're doing it now. I think we have to, from the Star Citizen side of things, we just have to deal with it. Like, but it doesn't hurt Star Citizen, does it? That's the point. It's worked out quite well for CIG, I think they can optimize a game that we all wanted them to optimize, whilst also optimizing a game that they had to optimize in Squadron 42. So, yeah,
So So you're saying that after all the time that CIG spent developing features and gameplay for Squadron and putting Star Citizen to the side to wait for all that effort to swing back around when they were done, once they finally finished those features being developed for Squadron,
yeah,
instead of turning to Star Citizen, they're now just switching to optimization mode for Squadron and doing the same thing for Star Citizen that they were doing with the features, which is just kind of using that to help benefit the PU. That's kind of a theory.
I I think so. I think it makes sense. It's the same. Ultimately, it all comes from the same code. They are using the same engine. Uh, I I know that a lot of the optimization work that they did. I chatted to some of the devs, or one of the devs at CitizenCon. They were working hard to get the Squadron 42 live gameplay showcase optimized. They did a lot of that, and that work was also then going to come over to Star Citizen, which I think is what we got with 4.0 potentially, where things actually got a bit better. So, yeah, I mean, CIG probably couldn't come out and say that. They couldn't come out and say, "Oh, so right, we did all this work on Squadron. It's kind of come over to the PU, but we now actually have to make it work really well with Squadron. So we're going to focus on that for a couple of years." I mean, there's a level of conspiracy theory about it, but we know that they have to optimize Squadron, and it is the same code base. So yeah, in some ways, there is no there is no conspiracy. It is just what they're doing, but they've kind of framed it as, "We've heard you." The letter kind of said, "Oh, we've heard the community. The community just really wants us to optimize the game and get some content in," which we do. But it's I think it's worked out pretty well for CIG that they've been able to frame this year going ahead as a PU focus, whereas I think maybe actually it's more about Squadron than they let on. So
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah, I mean, Squadron, it will always drive us. I do think no matter what, there's a lot of connections between this and Squadron. You've got,
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
said, Squadron needs to be optimized. Like a lot of other people will say, you can't release Squadron, and then I think actually you hinted at this. You can't
yeah,
release
yeah, yeah,
Squadron and have the persistent universe be
for
trash
sure.
because it would be
Yeah,
like, wait, I wanted to play more. Like you can't
exactly.
do this
Yeah,
huge advertisement for Star Citizen and then suddenly the game doesn't run well. So they do need to hit that level here.
yeah,
And again, with the timing and server meshing and all that, it makes sense. But I do think that they wanted to be further ahead in future development before they did this. Like having
yeah,
having the resource network having in like Maelstrom,
yeah.
the economy, all of that before you started doing this sort of content push would have been really much better.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can almost say from their initial targets, for the fact those things were targeted, engineering and fire and all those things were targeted for 4.0, they
Yeah,
100% wanted those things in.
yeah, that's true.
Uh, the interesting thing will be when they actually now do come in. Will they appear some point this year, or will they go the way of something like salvage, or maybe hacking is a better example right now, where they're forever just sitting there. We're hoping that they're going to come out, but actually, I mean, engineering is a big change to the game,
Yeah.
and if they really do want, what's funny again, we saw in those comments that Ali Brown made on Spectrum, one of the things he said was that they've not taken a full pull of the engine for a while. They're using kind of an old version of the engine, that, as in they have got more stuff going on, but they've just not pulled it into the main branch to release to us because they don't want to risk stability. So they are genuinely serious about stability this year. And so does that mean something like engineering doesn't come because they can't risk it? They want this content that they're putting out. It does rely on you being able to play the game, and we've
Hmm.
seen many patches where the game comes out completely broken, and it seems as they are actually committed to putting it in a decent space. So the one thing I'm confused about is what on earth has happened to the EPTU? I mean, why has there not been a single
They
mention of
do
that?
this
It's a bit
every
like,
year.
well, yeah, because it was a couple of years ago, wasn't it, where Jared said, "Oh yeah, we're gonna test this, we're gonna test this, we're gonna test this. You're gonna be testing all this stuff," and then none of that happened. They didn't mention it. We then came back to the EPTU in the letter from the chairman, and we're now what? We're not far off a third, well, a quarter of the.
We're done with
We're
the
coming
first
up to.
quarter.
Well, yeah, and where there's not been a single, as far as I can remember, I can't see that they've mentioned it at all. So
No.
engineering was the obvious thing to chuck into there. Has it gone the way of Has it gone the way of hacking? Our poor hacking. Where's it gone? Fallen in a hole
At
somewhere. It's
least we
in
get
a.
to
It's on
see
a.
it. Hacking
Well, yeah,
aside,
yeah,
we haven't even
yeah.
seen a freaking picture of hacking. Um, but I agree with you, man. The EPTU thing is weird. That's one of the
Yeah.
keys to making sure that while people can play this game this year, they can still develop features. And I did expect engineering to show up in there. I
Yep.
expect to see crafting in there this year.
Yeah.
The some form of scanning updates, whether on the ship or FPS side. Like there are things that we very well might not see this year, and
Yeah.
that would be a bad sign for future development. But I think we should. I think we should at least hear
Yeah.
about the EPTU at this point. Yeah.
It would be nice if they at least told us what their plans were, because it's not. Again, if you well, like we were saying before, if you followed this project for a while, you'll know that it's not absolutely crazy for CIG to say something in, was it December? The letter came out,
Hmm.
and then a couple of months later go, oh, forget that, we've changed our mind, we're doing something slightly different. As in, that's not, that sort of stuff happens often, and
Yeah.
so it may be that they've come at the start of the year and they've gone, oh, actually, our time is better spent doing something else. That has happened hundreds, thousands of times over the course of this project. So yeah,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
knows?
The content stability and playability is clearly still a thing, but the
Yeah,
EPTU is weird, and we'll give them some time. We'll see what they do after Q1.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
they're going to be using it mostly over the summer, but even last year they had already started using it for the server meshing tests at this point.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
Um, let's talk about how the performance has been improving. We've kind of determined what is causing it to prove and whether it's a good sign for players, but you said that a couple of years ago, 60 FPS would be crazy. How about from the release of 4.0 to now? What can people learn about how has the game? Because a lot of people just saw 4.0 come out and said, okay, I'm done. I'm just going to wait for this game to get to a good place. And it's definitely not there yet, but where has it gone? What's that kind of progress update?
yeah. So if you could get into 4.0, and for there was a period of time when you could right at the start, performance was pretty shocking. I made a video that basically said CRG have done pretty well here. Because compared to 324.3 or whatever it was, which was a horrible patch for performance, 4.0 itself was pretty good. I've got the numbers for. So again, this is the 9800 XUD. In 4.0.1, we're running around Lawville. The average was 79 FPS. And then in 4.0.2, like I said before, you're up around the 84, 85 mark. So things, even on a dot patch, there seems to be genuine improvements. And so if that continues, I mean, I don't think there's any guarantees that it will continue at that pace, but if CRG don't kind of get their gaze distracted by something else and they do genuinely just keep improving performance, hopefully by the end of the year, things will look significantly better. I mean, again, it is the low end that really we need
Hmm.
quite a lot of work, and percentage wise, yeah, the way it all works, you want you want the performance to be better for the lower end CPUs, but they have done a good job, and it's not fair really of me to turn around and say, oh, they've not been doing anything. They genuinely have been improving performance patch on patch, and so
So they're doing what
let's
they said.
they
Like,
are doing what they said. You can't
has
complain.
it? Have they ever done this before?
I don't think they've ever consistent over a number of patches made a performance push like they are doing, and they, like we said, they said they were going to do. In the past, there's been patches where things were so bad that they almost had to come in the next patch and do some clear up. So the entity counts in the cities, which does affect your client side performance, they sometimes just kind of go up and up and up and up and up, and then eventually gets to the point where their CIG will go in and do some work basically to fix things. And but we, like we said, like you're saying, that we've never seen them uh, for patch after patch after patch make the sorts of improvements that I've been seeing across my testing. So it's it's what everybody wants. Like, ultimately, even nobody doesn't want good performance. Like, even if you think you wish you were having more feature stuff coming out this year, nobody's going to complain if the game's performance gets better. It is a good thing. And so I think we have to almost they've set out to do what they want this year. Like it or hate it, you can't change what CIG are doing, but it is beneficial for everybody that they make the game better. So fair play to CIG. They get a lot of stick for a lot of things they do wrong, but we can't complain when the game performs better.
Yeah, that's fair. And we've been talking a lot about how hardware performs in terms of like frames per second and stuff, but the server performance is also a big thing.
Yep.
It's the stuff that people can't control where they're falling through surfaces and things. That's
Yeah.
still been lingering around. How do you think they're like between the updates they've given us for monthly reports and the
Mm.
Spectrum posts, how do you think they're doing on tackling those sorts of problems that I think most people are thinking about when they think about whether they want to play Star Citizen or not?
Yeah. So harder to test this. So it's more kind of what I notice when playing the game. I've always got display info open up, and I'm always checking out what the server FPS is. When 4.0 came out, and obviously they've then split the shard across the different servers. We've got 10, haven't we, across the two systems?
Yeah.
About 550 players ish. Um, we weren't guaranteed 30 FPS on all of those servers on that shard, but originally the minimum I kind of was seeing was around 15, 14, 13 FPS, as in things had significantly improved from pre-server meshing, where we would see 2, 5
Yeah,
sometimes
between 2 and 6.
FPS. Like, yeah, you could eat on a a full old server with 100 players on it. You could easily be running around and there'd be serious issues on the server. So they have done a really good job. They have improved the actual server experience for players significantly. I haven't necessarily noticed any significant change on that side of things from when 4.0 originally released to where we are now. I don't think. I wonder if what we've got now is basically the limits of this current kind of shard configuration, if that makes any sense. And in order to get better individual server performance, they'd either have to split things up even more, which I don't think they'll necessarily want to do from a money point of view. Costs
Hmm.
money to do this stuff, uh, or maybe they'll have to re-engineer some of the stuff. And we don't really know what the impact of dynamic server meshing is on this. We don't really know what their plans are. There's been a mention, I think, of dynamic server meshing somewhere not that long ago. I can't remember who it
I
was,
don't
but
recall.
I think
It's
I
been very
think there's
quiet
somebody
since October,
they
maybe. I think Balt
yeah
said something.
yeah, and they did all the work on the with all the big testing where everybody was jumping on and the big tests that were really fun to do.
Hmm.
But I wonder if again CIG will leave server meshing alone for a bit because it's quite stable generally, and so will they want to risk playability and stability, or will we get an ePTU where we're testing different shard configurations again, or will we hear anything about dynamic server meshing, which is obviously the thing that they're driving towards over the next however many years. Again, as with most things in Star Citizen, what we could really do is with CIG telling us what they're thinking, because there's just a lot of guesswork, I think, going at the moment. But the
Yep.
game is significantly better from a server side point of view than it was before 4.0, is the short version.
I'm seeing in the supporter chat here live that it is possible they are currently testing a 4 server per system by 600 player count in 4.1. So,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so maybe they are doing some small tweaks here and there for the PTUs, but I also wonder if they're going to kind of settle on static server. I know they didn't want to be on static server meshing for a while, but maybe they don't want to mess things up. But again, that's what the
Yeah.
EPTU's for.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting actually. What we could find is that they think what we've got now is good, but I mean, it could go the other way. It might be too expensive for them. We don't know what the ideal number of servers per shard is, and so it's not impossible that they say, well, we've got to move to less servers per shard than the current the numbers that we've got
Yeah.
because they have to save some money. We don't know.
Yeah.
So again, we'll see.
Whatever the case is, it's pretty likely that they are spending more money running the game now than they ever have in their history,
Yeah.
running
Yeah.
multiple servers per shard. So they want to move on to dynamic server meshing, try to limit that number. But this is
Yeah.
like they're now kind of at this race of okay, the game is running how it's kind of supposed to. We're putting more people towards bug fixing, more people towards content, and more money towards server costs. We need to start making more money. And I'm not saying that they're making losses or anything, but as much as people freak out about how much money they're making, they
Yeah.
have to cover increased costs.
Yeah. 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 And the thing that we haven't heard is obviously the financial report we're waiting for to see where are they at, because that although I don't know how wise it is for the community to just kind of like armchair accountant firm the whole situation and
Yeah,
work
we're
out.
terrible
But
at that. We're so
yeah,
freaking. I'm
we don't
awful at
know.
that.
We have no expertise. Most people don't have any expertise, and so you look at the numbers, you're like, well, this looks good or this looks bad. We don't really know.
Big
But
number.
but yeah, again, we in some way want CIG to come out and give us some information just so that we can probably have our next drama. We need something from CIG most weeks to give us a fun thing to talk about. But yeah, I think it's possible, like you said there, that they might just leave this alone because it works pretty well and it's acceptable. And so as they get towards Squadron coming out next year, like we were talking about before, I don't think this is a bad experience right now. This isn't. This is like they could probably get away with the current experience being the game's experience when Squadron comes out. I think from a server side point of view, it's significantly better than it was, like we said. But again, we're guessing.
Yeah, just fix the elevators and make you stop falling through
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because some of it is down to client side stuff, and some of it's down to server side stuff. Some of it is if you do run the game on different older maybe hardware, you do run into more bugs. If you have less RAM, there's all sorts of reasons. But yeah,
Mhm.
CRG is responsible to fix a lot of that stuff. So yeah,
Let's talk about graphics improvements because one of the other things we've talked plenty about performance and optimization today, and I think they're headed in a good direction there, as we've said. But there's also the actual look of the game. While they need to optimize and make things work,
yeah,
they also need to remain conscious of the fact that graphics and rendering and lighting in games is always moving forward. And you'll hear a lot of people be like, "Hey, this game's going to be graphically outdated by the time it comes out. It looks terrible right now."
yeah.
Um, but they have talked about some things they're working on in the background, like ray tracing. They're doing
Mhm.
anti-aliasing stuff. Some of this kind of like super resolution sort of stuff. Do you think they're keeping up in that department?
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't have any. I have no. This of all the things I worry about with Star Citizen, this isn't something I lose any sleep over. Uh, I just think if you look back through the history of the game, if you look back at if you go on the YouTube channel for the actual official one, and click on oldest and look at what the game looked like 15 years ago, well, not 15, not quite, 13 years ago. And then if you skip forward maybe 5 years and then you just keep checking in, the graphics of the game have dramatically improved over time. And the game to me, I mean, again, if we look at the Squadron, it was an actual demo in game that they proved by it crashing all the time. But we could see that this game looks stunning. Like,
Yeah,
I just don't
dude.
think there's no concern. I have no concern about the graphics.
When they showed us when they showed us the before and after of the cinematic stuff they did during 2023
Yeah,
Citizen Cops, like what?
yeah, yeah.
I
That,
yeah,
it,
because you
yeah,
didn't you don't realize the game doesn't look good 5 years ago, and then you look at
yeah.
the improved version of it, and you're like,
They look
oh,
bad.
right,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I just think it's almost like the only thing that they really prioritized over the years. Like they just were like, this game has to look as good as we can get it at each point. And so whether that's a Chris Roberts thing of just wanting to push things to the absolute max, and you obviously hear things about him getting involved in every single like kind of decision, and whether he's like reviewing artwork all the time, I don't know. But the concern, the people who are concerned that the game will look bad, I would say they might be actually blind. They might not be able to see because there's just there's no evidence that the game is going to look bad. Especially, I mean, resolution does play a lot into this. The game at I think 1440p and upwards, and at 4K, it looks crazy at points. It's crazy. It's a crazy looking game. The clouds are a masterpiece if you can turn the settings up enough and get
get
decent
it
frame
up,
rates.
yeah.
But yeah, it looks. I don't get the people who are like, oh, it might not look good in 10 years' time. If anything, CIG can guarantee is that they'll put effort into the graphics. Is yeah, it's a funny one.
Yeah, I think that's actually where the whole controlling the game engine yourself works. Because
Yeah,
while everybody else might be forced to use Lumen or Nanite because they're using Unreal Engine 5, and that might be more or less optimized for whatever they're doing, CIG can just come up with maybe not something equivalent to that, but similar. Like we see, they
Yeah,
already have their own version of DLSS, and maybe you don't want to
yeah,
use that because you
yes,
got
I
an
yeah.
NVIDIA card, but it's still a opportunity.
Yeah,
It's
they
extra.
can they can yeah, they can implement their own ray tracing stuff. They can, and this is stuff that you, if you're a game developer, you can obviously, you'll understand this better than most people will. And I'm not a game developer, but there, some of this stuff you can get into the game fairly easily, and some of it requires real effort. But CRG could do either of those. They could either port stuff in, they could either use things that are already out there, or they could use the extensive kind of dev pool they've got of really talented developers and do it themselves. Like I yeah, I have no issues. No, I mean, I'm there's so many things that if I was like to wake up in the night having some sort of nightmare about Star Citizen,
It's a cold sweat.
which yeah, kind of like, oh no, what's happening? What are they? This is just so far down on the list of the things that I'd be worried about.
You're just rolling out of the bed. You're writhing on the ground. You're like, Star Citizen's gonna have bad
Yeah,
lighting in 5 years. Dude, we can't
yeah,
even use elevators. Why is that your complaint?
yeah. That is exactly it.
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that we can probably depend on is going to carry forward its graphics, and I think it goes far beyond whether or not it's the most beautiful game in the world. It doesn't need to be. It's an MMO. Like there's not MMOs aren't known for their graphics, and I
No,
think that um, as long as they
but
have
this
the
one will be.
gameplay, yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah, it
This one
will.
will be. See, Chris Roberts is he won't let up on this one. I don't think. I just think there's no way. So this will be this partially is why it is spectacular and it has the potential to be something crazy. Is that the fidelity and the immersion, the good words are so high up on a game that in a genre of game, like say MMO, that isn't important. If you look at World of Warcraft, a still very popular game, or something like Eve, very popular still, they don't look good. The graphics in some ways they're awful, but this one this one will be an MMO with have the craziest graphics you've ever seen, just because they've got a bunch of lunatics that we are pumping money into the project. So yeah, yeah. Don't worry about this. People who are out there worrying about the graphics, relax. You're fine. It's gonna be fine.
We'll be okay. It'll still be okay to look at. Um, all right. With all that being said, let us talk. Well, just definitively, just to answer the question for this podcast or not.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure you already have, but performance this year, is it
Yeah.
headed in the right direction?
I will say definitively, which is sounds like a scary thing to say on the internet, but from everything I've tested and everything I've seen, it is going in the right direction, and they are doing what they said they were going to do.
Do you think it's fast enough for the fact that we still have 9 more months
Oof.
that we're at March?
Uh, I mean, I'm happy with what they're doing so far. Whether it's fast enough will depend on whether they keep going at the pace they are. As in, if they just stop now and you got to the end of the year and that was what they'd done, they'd improved things by like 6 FPS or whatever on the CPU side. I'd say that isn't enough. But if they keep going at anywhere near the pace they're doing, if they keep improving things, then yeah, I'd be very happy with that. I wouldn't be sitting here at the end of the year complaining. No.
Okay. Well, I will have you on then. Everybody stay
Yeah,
tuned.
yeah.
It's
Oh, that could be fun.
episode 199 today. We'll be back
Okay.
in like a good 20 episodes or so, 15, 20
Yeah,
episodes, and
yeah.
we'll talk about how it's going. Um outside of that, how you feeling about 4.1 coming up?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously completely the other side of things that they've talked about this year, the content side of things. And I have to say, I'm surprised they're doing as much as they're doing. I've been I mean, I normally stay in my lane and stick to kind of performance stuff, but occasionally
Hmm.
I'll get the bravery up to just make a video with my opinion on something. And I've been pretty critical about the missions and the chains and the events in this game. I think over the last couple of years, some of the kind of global events and the things that we've been kind of fed as our content have been pretty poor. I absolutely hated my experience of Save Stanton. It took me an incredibly long period of time because it was so broken. The game, the bugs, everything about it was a genuinely. It might be my worst experience in all of gaming, and that's not an
Wow.
exaggeration. It was. It was so. So I think I took. I can't find the post now, but I think I spent 50 hours trying to do the different phases, and in the end, I relied on. I turned. I don't stream basically ever, but I out of desperation streamed for 7 hours straight to try and get through it, and I still didn't finish it in that time, and that was with people helping me. So that was a bad experience. But what they're doing now with 4.0, and let's include 4.0, things like the contested zones,
Wait,
things
which
like the
one?
Hathors.
What was it that you were saying you couldn't get done?
Say Stanton, so the
Okay,
one
yeah,
that was
yeah,
in Stanton, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So
Gotcha.
now we've moved to obviously Fight for
Fight for
Pyro.
Pyro, yeah,
I
and
did. I ran through that on my own without much issue. The first stage, and that was okay. So I got my skins. I decided I liked the skins the most of the terrorist group. Whoops.
part of that group,
Um,
huh? Did you feel like you had
yeah.
gotten fooled in the right way, or did you feel like you were ripped off with that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have talked about this already. What I
Yeah.
think is interesting is that I thought, "Ooh, this is the first time I've done something in the game that feels like it might have some sort of lasting effect on the character." If you imagine your character as an actual character in like a movie or whatever, my character
Someday.
now has done this thing. I didn't really mean to do this thing, um, and it's not like the way that we're playing the game now with what CIG are doing. It's not like, oh, this is all wiped away. Like this is like in-game lore that they're now building, and I am now I'm a kind of like a terrorist by accident. So it's a weird place to be. I'm gonna maybe I should just take myself to jail for a while just so I can feel better about
I
myself.
say
Maybe I'll
double
do
down,
my
dude. Just
time.
go and join Xenothreat.
Well, what the weird thing is that you can't now. That's maybe my bigger issue is that say I did want to just be with the terrorist group, they don't have any missions
Yeah,
in the
they're
current
gone.
version.
They just
You
left
have to
you.
fight. You have to fight against them. So I'm now fighting against and in some ways that isn't a great piece of.
That's really
No,
funny.
that's
They're
not great.
like, join our team, fight for
Yeah,
us. Okay, this is great. We'll see you next year. You just survive in
yeah.
Pyro.
I don't know if we'll ever see them again. I think that I would imagine this chain of narrative stuff will end with the elimination of this group that I was kind of part of for a few weeks. It's a
I
weird
don't
thing,
know.
and there are problems.
This seems like it could be their go-to sort of narrative events that go on maybe once or twice a year in the Stanton Pyro system, and they could just do this for each star system has its own kind of ongoing thing that replenishes itself.
Yeah,
I guess like no point in
yeah,
killing this faction if you used it before, but I do feel what you're saying, especially with the fact that not every faction supported the same, so you can't really keep that storyline going. But there's also like reputation's one thing. Do you think you should get like a badge or something that represents you in games so that in 2 years' time, when people are looking through your portfolio or whatever, your
yeah,
profile, they can tell that you helped to overturn the freaking government of Stanton?
yeah. I mean, I think there's things like I think I think they've obviously done things like it. I was one of the people who originally did the Vandal Mask, the original one, and I did
Hmm.
it legitimately by I didn't conga line. I literally ran around the system PvPing, and it took a while, but I did it, and I actually achieved that thing. And so my thought was at that moment, oh, I've done something pretty cool. I've got this thing that shows that I've done that. And then they obviously just chuck them in the league table, and so now everybody's got a Vandal Mask. But I don't know whether it's a badge or whether it's something that shows. Obviously, if you did the Xenothreat things in the past, you've got CDF armor, things like that. I I don't know how they best do it, but I mean, in some ways, I'm pretty glad that that maybe my character now doesn't have some sort of mark against his name that says,
True. Yeah.
"Yeah,
No, I
I
mean,
was a horrible person."
we're all going to get a reset at some point, but I do wonder if after
Yeah,
1.0, it would be good to have not just the rep that somebody has, but the milestones of their character, because
yeah, that'd be cool.
that's helpful. I mean, it helps
Yeah,
to be able to, if you're going to trust someone who wants to run medic for your big expedition, and then you go and you look through their profile and you see they were part of the freaking Magda massacre, you're like, oh, maybe
yeah.
I see you got a good rep right now, but you I don't know. Like that's stuff you want to know.
Yeah, yeah, I guess there's complications in terms of you could be going quite heavily into one play style for a while, you could feel a bit burnt out and then just completely change up. So you could genuinely be going around massacring people and then actually turn over a new leaf and become a genuine medic. Like that could
Yeah.
actually happen. But yeah, I suppose it maybe it's helpful to know that in your past uh you were a murderous fiend, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
It's
I think there's all sorts of stuff like that they should do, whether they're ready to do it. But on the whole, I'm surprised by how much they're popping into the game. Like that was the original question. The Hathor stuff and then the Wakello, the Banu.
mhm.
I think if you said to me at the start of the year, what do you think CRG's plans will be for content? I don't think I would have expected things like this. I think these mission chains or kind of sandboxy events like the Hathor one and the contested zones, I think I'm impressed with the direction they're going in. They could definitely deliver the lore better. We can talk about that, but yeah, on the whole, the content. I mean, what I'm effectively saying is the performance side of stuff is pretty good, and the content stuff is it's got its flaws, but actually, what they're putting into the game, if they continue this pace with more and more things like this throughout the year, then they'll have done pretty well. It's again, it's will this drop in? Will the Hathor stuff come? Will we get the eventual Sandworm stuff? And then they're like, oh, now we need to spend another year getting the next bits and bobs in.
Right.
I guess we'll see.
Yeah. So your outlook is basically that they're doing the right things right now. They
Yeah,
just need to keep doing them.
they're doing what they said. Whether they were the right things or not, I don't know. I personally wasn't convinced that I think because of the things we talked about with Squadron, where they kind of needed to get this game in a good place and optimize that one, it was probably the right decision overall. I think a lot of people would still, like you said, prefer them to get things like engineering in before they then started optimizing. But they're doing what they said, and they don't always do what they say. So we've got to give them some credit.
This is true. This is true. I think that depending on like the next few months,
Yeah,
the way they talk about features, if they start using the EPTU, that's really key. They're doing a great job with these content releases. They're building in the lore. They are building in things that look like people can benefit from them at all times outside of our normal missions. Like these aren't just mercenary
yeah,
missions in new locations. There's actually some level of interactivity and objective to it. And I know for a fact that internally they see contested zones as a big win, a successful launch. So we will
yeah,
start seeing more stuff like that. Maybe not artificially split up, but separated geographically, kind of like the Hathor group locations. So I think if they keep doing that, we're good. We just need to make sure that there is some level of feature development going forward. And I think one of the big things people are missing is that the playability they talk about is also the little like bits and bobs that annoy us, like the physics collisions between ships. That's not something
yeah,
somebody would have said. Hey, what do they need to fix to make this game more playable? Oh, I need to make sure that auroras don't blow up my Polaris when they hit them.
yeah,
It's something you complain about,
yeah,
but it's not like
yeah,
a real key thing. And they're also hitting on those too. We see
yeah,
different balancing in ships, slaved weapons that people are enjoying seeing, new
yeah, yeah.
interactions. Like they're doing a lot outside of just the obvious bits, and I think that's pretty key too.
100%. Yeah, that they are generally doing what they said, and they are, and the hope is that the game will be a significantly better experience to play by December. That's it. I there are plenty of things to complain about potentially at the moment in terms of people having big feelings around obviously things like the item recovery stuff.
Hmm.
CIG aren't able to just completely navigate this first few months without some sort of
Yeah,
controversy, but the things that they are doing well, they are we shouldn't complain. They are doing some things really, really well
yeah.
right now.
They're going to make their missteps. I'm glad that they're even trying to. We've been hearing about item
Yeah.
recovery on ISC for years. I'm glad they're
Yes.
implementing stuff. You know, they are doing. They're walking the talk now. Even if it's not
Yeah.
quite the right talk, they're no longer just sitting back and letting the game guide itself. It feels like they're trying to take control and make something happen here. So
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
All right, man.
It's yeah, yeah. Go.
No, sorry. Please.
No, no.
Finishing
I was
thoughts.
gonna say, well, I was just on the item recovery. It's just very controversial, and my hope is that again, like the things we've been talking about, this isn't something that they've just dropped in at the start, and they're leaving it now. Obviously, we've had that a lot of times with tier zero stuff, but the hope is that like we're saying, we want them to keep working on performance. We want them to keep improving the content, and I suppose with the item recovery stuff, what we really want is that they do keep genuinely working on it, and we do move through the tiers much quicker than we have in the past, because I don't
Yeah.
think the tier 0 experience can last in the game for long.
Yeah, that's
There's
very
too many
key.
flaws.
They need to get probably 1/4, maybe 2/4 with that model, and then move on.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, man. Thank you for joining me for this talk. I hope everybody was able to get a little more understanding of where Star Citizen is in its performance journey, how it's playing right now, when might be the right time for you to jump in based on how it's playing and what computer you need to run it. But if you want more of this kind of information, 10pound42 does a whole bunch of this content. And to be quite honest, if I can say so myself, I think in the last year you've found like a really good groove with the balance of like performance and opinion, like you've been saying. I've been enjoying
Yeah,
the
cool.
videos, dude. So
Good.
thank you for putting those out. If you want to
Thank
let
you.
the folks know where exactly they can find you, though, please do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, just £10.42 on the YouTube. That's the only place it is. There's nowhere else. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on any of these other places. I can only hack one thing. I mean, the actual thing is, if you want help with this stuff, we've got a Discord that has got people who are so helpful. It's genuinely amazing. There's people who will come into Discord, say, "Oh, I'm looking at this," or "What's going on with my PC?" or "How do I squeeze a bit more performance out? Do some overclocking." There's some amazing people on there. So the Discord is worth joining if you want some help or just guidance on stuff, because there's some incredible people there. So yeah,
Cool, man.
YouTube for all the stuff. But really, if you were to search Star Citizen CPU, you probably will find one of my videos. So yeah.
Awesome. To be quite honest, I think that you would find a lot of success just posting quick clips or screenshots of your benchmark tests to Blue Sky, because a lot of people are
Interesting.
looking for those kind of like quick
Okay.
references of how is Star Citizen performing. Or you could do it on Twitter, bigger platform, a little more crazy. But
Bit
like if
more
you choose
controversial,
your
yeah.
choose your micro blogging platform, I think
Yeah,
people would really
interesting.
I see that a lot coming from channels like Digital Foundry, and it gets a
Mm,
lot of engagement and attention. They'll come to your YouTube from there.
cool, interesting. I'll have a look. Thank you.
Anyways, thank you everybody for watching or listening. And if you'd like and you are a supporter on Twitch, YouTube, or Patreon, of course, you can always join us live. You can post in little chats. You can listen to our gossip before and after. And you can ask questions to the guest. But that is it for this week. Thank you all, everybody, for listening. We'll be back next week for some interesting space talk, space game stuff. It is going to be episode 200. And I'm not doing what I did for 100 because that was quite a lot. But we'll do something a little fun. So I'll see y'all next week. Thanks again for joining. And 10 Pound, thank you for coming in as well. Bye, everybody.